The first sign was not an explosion nor a villain's grand entrance, it was silent. Metropolis, a city that thrived on noise and life, woke to an unsettling quiet one dawn. Birds fell from the sky in unison, their wings stiff mid-flight. Children awoke screaming from nightmares they could not describe, clutching their bedsheets with trembling fists. And above the city the sun seemed dimmer, its warmth veiled behind something Superman could not yet name. Clark Kent had faced alien invasions, godlike beings, and wars between worlds. He had stopped machines from tearing open dimensions and saved planets from annihilation. But this was different. The unease wasn't born of what he could see. It was in the spaces between, in the trembling of air, in the whispers caught by ears that should have heard nothing. Reports streamed in, entire neighborhoods overcome by sudden panic, commuters fainting on train, families describing shadows moving without light. A factory worker in Metropolis claimed that his reflection had smiled back at him long after he'd turned away. Another man insisted the voice of his dead wife had called him from the shadows of his home. Superman moved quickly, responding to cries for help. But the strangeness only grew sharper when he arrived. Standing in the heart of a street where dozens screamed at nothing, he felt his powers fluctuate. Heat vision, normally a razor of precision, sputtered as if the world resisted his gaze. His hearing, capable of detecting the faintest whispers across continents, flooded with static, as if the atmosphere itself pulsed with hidden murmurs. Even his strength, always reliable, seemed to drag against him, like invisible chains binding his body. He landed beside a terrified mother clutching her child, whose eyes rolled with feverish vision. "Stay calm," he said softly, his voice steady, his hand warm on her shoulder. "I'll get you safe." Yet even as he spoke, the child gasped, her voice breaking into words no human tongue should have formed. "He sees you." For a fraction of a second, Clark froze. The words were not hers. They resonated like 1,000 voices speaking at once, layered over her fragile frame. Then she collapsed, exhausted. Carrying her into the light, Superman scanned the city. Metropolis shimmered with familiar outline, but its edges bled wrong. Colors warped when he turned too quickly, as though the world struggled to hold itself together. He knew reality, he trusted it more than anything, but now it bent in ways his Kryptonian mind could not explain. The warp had begun to seep into his universe, though he did not yet know its name. It did not announce itself like an invading army. It dripped into cracks of human fear, infecting dreams, twisting grief, amplifying despair. It was not an enemy of muscle and steel. It was rot, slow, invisible, relentless. Superman fought against collapsing structures and hallucinations alike. He pulled people from buildings where the walls seemed to breathe. He blocked traffic as drivers screamed shapes only they could see. Yet every act of salvation left him with questions. Who was orchestrating? Why did his strength falter here when it had never failed before? As night fell, the city groaned under a weight unseen. People huddled in homes, lighting candles not for light but to keep shadows at bay. The news whispered of riots, of whole towns succumbing to collective nightmare. And as Superman soared above the skyline, his cape trailing crimson against the darkened sky, he could not escape the truth gnawing at his mind. This was not the work of a villain he could punch or disarm. It was an infection of the soul. Hovering above the city, he clenched his fists, determination burning even through doubt. He had vowed to protect Earth from anything man, machine, or God. But for the first time, he wondered if his greatest enemy would not strike his body but his very spirit. The whispers in the air followed him as he flew, promising that this was only the beginning. The trail led Superman to a forgotten quarter of Metropolis, an abandoned warehouse where the air vibrated with low, unnatural chanting. He could hear it even before he touched down. The rhythm was wrong, a cadence that seemed to coil inside the skull rather than strike the ear. His vision sharpened, revealing faint purple currents seeping through cracks in the brickwork, like veins pulsing with corrupted light. Inside, a crowd knelt before a crude altar assembled from twisted scrap and bloodied tool. Candles guttered in a pattern that formed no human geometry, their flames bending inward as though drawn to something unseen. Superman scanned the group. Ordinary citizens, office workers, students, even a shopkeeper he recognized. Their eyes glowed faintly, pupils dilated to nothingness, their voices weaving together in an unholy hymn. Corn, blood and rage, Tezinch, fate and change, Nurgle, rot and despair, Slanesh, excess and desire. The names dripped from their lips like venom, each syllable vibrating through the air. Clark felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. These were not gods of hope or guidance, These were promises of destruction, whispered into human minds until devotion rotted into obsession. He stepped forward. "Stop this." His voice cut through the chamber, firm yet steady. "You don't understand what you're calling up." Dozens of faces turned as one. Their mouths widened in eerie, unnatural smiles. "He comes!" He listened. "You are the offering." Before Superman could move, they raised their arms in unison. The air split open. The sound was not a crack but a shriek, the fabric of reality tearing like flesh. A vertical wound appeared in the center of the room, glowing with impossible colors. Through it, Clark glimpsed vision that clawed at his mind. Armored giants drenched in blood, their jagged blades glistening under skies of fire. Demons with wings of shadow and eyes like suns, writhing in impossible shapes, each one whispering his name. Voices poured from the rift, layered and endless, promising glory, ruin, and eternity. Superman's knees nearly buckled. For the first time in years, he felt something more than danger. He felt dread. The sight of it pressed into him like a weight beyond comprehension, reminding him that he was not looking at enemies in the flesh, but the idea of chaos itself. The cultists began to change. Skin split and bubbled, sprouting spines or gaping mouths. Fingers twisted into claws, their bodies reshaped by devotion into grotesque vessels. They surged toward him, chanting louder as the rift widened. Superman moved. Heat vision lanced across the floor, cutting a line between the cultists and the growing tier. He fought without hesitation, speed disarming one, strength hurling another clear. Yet, as he struck, the air resisted, pulling at his fist, dragging at his cape. Every punch seemed to echo in two realities at once. His strength felt diminished, as though chaos fed on the very act of conflict. He forced his way to the altar, shattering it with one blow. The chanting faltered, the rift trembling. A rush of wind roared inward, pulling the warped light back into itself. With a thunderclap, the wound snapped shut. Silence fell. The cultists collapsed, their mutations fading into twisted scars. Superman stood amidst the wreckage, chest heaving, eyes scanning for any sign that the breach remained. He heard only the faint drip of wax, the groan of beams settling. But the whispers lingered. "We see you. You are not beyond rule break." Clark swallowed hard. He had fought Darkseid, Brainiac, and gods who claimed dominion over worlds. But this was different. This was not conquest. This was corrosion. He looked at the unconscious cultists, ordinary people who had chosen to kneel before something beyond comprehension, and realized the war ahead would not be waged solely with fists. It would be fought in the minds and hearts of humanity, with his own soul as the prize. For the first time in memory, Superman left the battlefield not reassured, but shaken. The Arctic night met him with a hush. The fortress of solitude rose from ice like a cathedral as Superman descended. Doors unfurled at his approach. Kellex floated forward, chirping queries. He raised a hand and walked to the dais where consoles thrummed. He fed sensor logs from Metropolis into the system. Holograms blossomed, waveforms that should not exist, colors outside the spectrum, emotional valences mapped as data. Correlation, fear spikes precede spatial instability. Anomalous field amplifies with despair, diminishes with communal resilience. Clark exhaled. He had felt it. The way the air fought him when panic rose, the slackening when courage returned. He summoned the Brainiac-derived analytic core, a sterile intelligence he kept firewalled. Its voice was clinical, dispassionate, and honest. Phenomenon exceeds physical model. Hypothesis: extra-dimensional psychoreactive medium. Vector name unknown. The warp, he said. The core process. Designation accepted. Advisory, hostile ontology. Engagement risk. Indefinite. He watched recordings of the cultists, ordinary people, their humanity twisted by belief sharpened into worship. He slowed the footage to frames. The moment a man's eyes emptied, the instant a woman's smile widened past the borders of flesh. He paused there, feeling the ache behind his ribs. These were the people he had sworn to protect, and they had been taken not by force, but by invitation engineered from pain. He paced the hall, cape brushing over alloy. The fortress responded to his steady heartbeat with light panels blooming like morning. He remembered Par's hands on a Kansas fence post, steadying a beam with patient strength. Mar's voice reminding him that hope is a habit, not a feeling. Krypton had given him power. Earth had given him purpose. Data spiraled overhead. Nurgle's rot correlating with resignation, Slonish's call with hollowed joy, Khorne with righteous fury turned feral, Tezinte was doubt dressed as wisdom. The pattern was razor clear, the warp fed on whatever a heart surrendered. If fear weakened his world, then courage could starve the intruder. If despair opened doors, then compassion could close them. The analytic core offered strategy. Quarantine zones, psychic dampening fields extrapolated from phantom zone harmonics, alert networks keyed to mass emotion indices. Useful, necessary, insufficient. He needed more than tactics, he needed a line no storm could cross. He stood before the crystal of remembrance, where echoes of Jor-El's counsel sometimes answered in light. Father, he murmured to chamber, what resists a tide that rises from within? The crystal glowed, refracting his silhouette into 1,000 steadfast figures. No words came, only his own shape thrown back at him, multiplied. Understanding settled. There would be no artifact to save them, no machine to outthink gods that fed on weakness. The answer had to be lived. He opened the fortress to the sun. Arctic clouds parted, light poured in, charging every cell with familiar warmth. Strength returned, not as arrogance, but clarity. Chaos would claw at the world with claws of feeling. Then he would teach the world how to feel differently, how to stand, to breathe, to choose one another when terror whispered. He recorded a message for emergency network, voice calm as winter. Guidance for grounding, for helping a neighbor through panic, turning crowds into communities. He pinged league channels, asking for readiness, not alarm. He drafted a plan to place beacons in hospitals, schools, precincts, devices not to command hearts, but to remind them. Kellex drifted. Kal-El? I'm all right, he said, and meant it. Fear pressed at the margins like frost on glass, but it would not enter. We hold the line. He stepped onto the threshold, where blue sky met endless white. The cape lifted in the clean wind. You won't rule this world, he said to the listening darkness. Not while I can stand, not while anyone can. Then he rose into the light, a small figure against a vast horizon, and the fortress shone behind him like a promise kept. The first call came from Gotham. Police scanners sputtered with incoherent chatter, officers screaming about buildings melting, streets that turned into rivers of ash, citizens clawing at their own skin as shadows whispered into their ears. The League's channels lit up with warnings, but Superman was already in motion, streaking across the night sky. When he descended, Gotham was unrecognizable. A district that had once been alive with neon and restless energy had transformed into a living nightmare. Skyscrapers slumped like wax or a torch, their windows stretching into warped mouths. Asphalt bubbled, hissing like boiling tar. The sky had bled crimson, threaded with green lightning that forked without thunder. The air smelled of rot and smoke, choking even Superman's Kryptonian lungs. He landed in the chaos, cape whipping in the poisoned wind. Civilians fled in waves, stumbling, screaming, some already half consumed by madness. He heard one woman shriek at phantoms no one else could see, her eyes blind yet staring. A boy clutched a broken toy, murmuring names in a tongue Superman didn't recognize. Then they came. From fissures in the ground, clawed shapes too grotesque to be born of any world. Towering demons covered in scales of molten brass, their claws tipped with fire, lumbered forward with roars that split glass. Smaller, faster horrors slipped between shadows, serpentine things that dissolved into smoke when struck, only to reform behind them. Spectral figures drifted overhead, their mouths whispering in unison. Power awaits, Kryptonian. You only need to take it. Superman charged. His heat vision cut twin beams of light through the first wave, incinerating beasts into ash. But ash became flesh again, bodies knitting together from black smoke and sparks. He smashed another with his fists, sending it flying through a collapsing wall. But from its ruin crawled two more, shrieking with joy as if his strike had only multiplied them. The battle became a blur of motion. Superman threw himself between fleeing civilians and the advancing swarm, his body a wall of resistance. Every strike was a contradiction. Fists that shattered mountains now struggled against enemies, refused to stay dead. Every second felt like fighting water with stone, punching waves only for them to rise higher. A claw raked his chest, fiery pain lanced through his body, the wound glowing with embers resisted heat. He grit his teeth, fighting through it. A second beast lunged, jaws. He seized it, hurling it into the sky, chasing it with a sonic boom, then burning it to nothing in the upper atmosphere. For a moment, stars returned. Then the sky bled again, thicker, hungrier. The whispers grew louder. You cannot win. You can only join. Imagine your strength unchained. Imagine eternity in our embrace. The voices threaded with temptation, each one sliding under his defenses like poison. He shook his head, jaw tight, refusing to listen. He pulled survivors from the ruins, lifting children into his arms, shielding a group of officers with his body as demon fire rained down. Move! His voice carrying command and comfort. Keep going. Don't stop. Their fear pressed against him, but he held the line, forcing them forward until the last family stumbled clear of the district's edge. Behind him, the battlefield groaned. The ground shifted, forming symbols in rivers of glowing magma. The demons surged again, delighting in his exhaustion. They were not an army seeking conquest. They were hunger given form, delighting in chaos for its own sake. Superman's eyes blazed. He rose above the swarm, heat vision erupting in a storm of fire, scorching the district until molten stone hissed beneath him. Demons screeched as their forms unraveled, shadows scattering. For one breathless moment, the city fell silent again. He floated in the smoke, chest heaving, his suit scorched and torn. He had one, or so it seemed, because even as the last embers dimmed, he felt the air vibrate again, as if reality itself had learned to bleed. This was not a war of victories. It was a war of attrition, fought against nightmare that thrived on his defiance. And Gotham was only the beginning. The aftermath of Gotham had barely cooled when another alarm reached Superman, this time from Coast City. Reports described armed mobs tearing through the streets, chanting in unison as fires consumed entire blocks. At first, he expected rioters driven mad by fear. What he found was far worse. A column of men and women advanced through the city square, their bodies grotesquely altered by warp-born strength. Muscles bulged against cracked skin, veins glowing faint red beneath the surface as if their blood boiled. They carried axes forged from blackened steel that glowed with heat, each swing carving trenches in asphalt. Others dragged chains tipped with hooks, their clangor rhythm to the chant echoing in corn, corn, corn. Superman landed ahead of them, raising his hands in peace. "You don't need to do this," he said firmly. Voice amplified. "Put down your weapon. No one else has to be hurt." They halted for eyes locking on him. In those glares was no fear, only exultation. A man at the front, his skin painted with smeared blood, stepped forward. "The blood god has heard us," he growled. "And he has sent you, champion of order, symbol of restraint. What greater offering than to test our strength against you?" The crowd roared, striking weapons against the ground. Before Superman could speak again, the man lunged. His axe slammed down with such force it cracked the pavement, the shockwave hurling cars aside. Superman blocked the blow with his forearm. Pain flared, more than he expected. These weren't mortals wielding crude steel. Warp energies coursed through their weapons, each strike designed to pierce and punish. The battle erupted. Axes flashed, hooks lashed, and fists swollen with unnatural might struck like hammers. Superman moved among them, disarming one cultist, shattering another's blade, sweeping innocents out of harm's way. His restraint was absolute. He struck to disable, never to kill. But every time one cultist fell, another rose, screaming louder, fueled by the blood already spilled. It was as if defeat itself fed them. He deflected a chain that would have torn through a fleeing family, then caught an axe meant for a police barricade. The weapon vibrated in his grip, sparks dancing along the blade, as if alive with rage. He snapped it in two, only for its wielder to laugh, blood dripping from his mouth. "Every drop strengthens him." Superman gritted his teeth. These weren't villains who sought power or riches, they were believers. Each one saw his intervention not as a threat, but as confirmation of their god's glory. Every moment he fought them, he gave them what they wanted. Proof of endless battle. The cult's fury escalated. A woman hurled a spear wreathed in psychic fire. It detonated against Superman's chest, blasting him backward into a crumbling building. He emerged from the rubble, cape torn, skin scorched. His breath came hard, but his eyes still burned with resolve. "You call this strength?" he shouted, holding up the broken spear. "Strength isn't blood spill, it's the lives we protect." For a heartbeat, silence hung. But then the roar returned, louder than before, their chant drowning the night. Blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne. Superman surged forward, fighting with precision and restraint, dismantling their weapon, slamming cultists into walls hard enough to break their fervor without breaking their lives. The battle raged until, finally, only groans remained, the square littered with shattered steel and unconscious bodies. He stood blooded, not his own, but theirs, splattered across his suit, sticky in his gloves. He stared at his hands. He had fought to save, yet in their eyes he had only glorified the endless war they worshipped. Superman turned toward the city lights beyond the smoke. He had won the fight, yes, but Korn's cult had left him with a chilling truth. Some enemies did not seek victory or survival. They sought only conflict itself, and against that, how could even he prevail? The square in Coast City still reeked of smoke and blood when Superman finally lifted to the night sky. Below, the unconscious bodies of Khorne's worshippers lay scattered, their chants silenced for now. Fire crews rushed in, civilians emerged from hiding, and for a fleeting moment the city seemed safe again. Yet even as Superman rose toward the stars, he knew victory had been hollow. He had not extinguished them, he had only delayed it. Far beyond mortal, the warp stirred. Like ripples spreading across an infinite ocean of madness, the echoes of Superman's defiance reached ears that should never have listened. Four presences loomed vast and terrible, their attention converging upon the lone Kryptonian. Khorne growled first, a roar like grinding steel and rivers of blood boiling. A warrior who will not kill, his voice shaking dimensions. A contradiction, a prize. I will see his skull upon my throne. Teasing Chi's laughter followed, 1,000 tones woven into one. Such purity, such certainty. All things bend, even steel. I will twist his ideals until they bind him tighter than any chain. His truth will serve my schemes. Nurgle crooned with a voice like rotting wood, thick with decay yet dripping with grotesque warmth, so proud. But all lights fade, and even he will learn the comfort of despair. I will smother his hope until he begs for my gifts. Last came Slaanesh, a whisper soft as silk yet sharper than any blade. How he yearns, how he loves. His heart is ripe for plucking, his desires waiting to be fed. When he surrenders to what he wants most, he will be mine. The warp itself convulsed with their awareness. Demonic legions rallied at the call, endless hosts sharpening blades, whispering spells, caressing their chains. Superman had become more than a nuisance. He was now a challenge, a figure of defiance the Pantheon could not ignore. In the Fortress of Solitude, Clark sat cross-legged on a dais of crystal, eyes closed, seeking the calm center he had always relied upon. But peace would not come. A weight pressed against him, invisible yet suffocating, as if the sky itself leaned down to crush his chest. His breath slowed, his hands trembling despite his iron will. For the first time since he was a boy, raised on a Kansas farm under open skies, he felt truly small. Visions poured into his mind. A battlefield where rivers of blood stretched a horizon, and Khorne stood waiting with a grin of iron fangs. A labyrinth of shifting mirrors where Tezzy whispered his every secret back at him, twisting each into life. A garden of decay where corpses laughed as Nurgle's swollen hand beckoned him closer. A palace of endless pleasures where Lois waited, alive and eternal, calling his name with Slaanesh's smile. Superman's heart pounded. He forced the images back, opening his eyes to the frozen halls of the fortress. His reflection stared back in the crystal walls, pale and sweat-like, but still unbroken. "They see me," he whispered. His voice echoed across the chamber, carrying on the silence. "And if they see me, then this war has only begun." Kellex drifted near, humming anxiously, but he waved it off. Rising to his feet, he walked to the edge of the fortress, staring out at the Arctic night. The auroras shimmered faintly overhead, though to him they looked more like scars, tears bleeding across the fabric of the sky. Shadows lengthened across Earth. In distant places, cults stirred. In hidden corners of the war, demons sharpened. The Pantheon had turned their gaze to him, and nothing in the universe would ever be the same again. Superman squared his shoulders, the chill wind snapping his cape. The odds were unthinkable. 4 gods, each eternal, each feeding on emotions that all mortals carried within them. He was one man, one heart, one will, and yet he whispered into the night, firm and unyielding, "I will not break." The words echoed into silence. But in the warp, laughter answered. The first thing he noticed was the color of the sky. It glowed the deep, oppressive crimson of a red sun, and its heat pressed down on him like a weight. Superman staggered, blinking, his body sluggish. His strength bled away under that light, familiar yet wrong. He inhaled sharply. The air smelled of crystal spires, clean metallic stone, and the faint electric hum of energy conduit. Krypton. He stood in the middle of a great plaza lined with soaring towers, their surfaces carved in the elegant geometric pattern of his people. Crowds moved in quiet harmony, robes trailing behind them. Voices drifted in the Kryptonian tongue, words he hadn't heard spoken so freely since he was a baby. And then he saw them, Jor-El and Lara, walking toward him as if no time had passed. Their faces were serene, their postures proud. For a heartbeat, he was a child again, arms outstretched, longing for the embrace he had never truly known. "Father? Mother?" His voice cracked with disbelief. They smiled faintly, though the warmth never reached their eyes. "You have returned to us," Jor-El said, his tone like the echo of a lecture. Lara's hand brushed his cheek, but her touch felt cold, almost glassy. "You see? All you have ever sought is Why struggle in a world that was never yours? Clark's heart pounded. He wanted to believe it, wanted to sink into the impossible comfort of what he had lost. Yet, as his gaze swept the plaza, unease prickled. The house of El Crest gleamed above a monument. Its familiar S was distorted, dripping as though carved from molten flesh. Citizens whispered as they passed, and though the language was Kryptonian, the words warped into murmurs of alien names. Korn, Tzintius Negel, Slanesh. The crowd bowed before the monument, their faces expressionless masks that cracked to reveal mouths beneath mouths. The plaza's symmetry rippled, lines twisting into shapes that bent logic. He clenched his fists. This isn't real. The world shimmered like water disturbed. For a moment, the red sun flickered blue, then flared scarlet. His parents' forms blurred, their eyes glowing with faint warplight. Jarell's smile widened unnaturally. What is real, my? Is it Earth, that fragile rock you protect while it curses your power? Or Krypton, restored by the will of gods who can make all things possible? A new voice slithered across the plaza, threaded through every word, every movement. It was not spoken aloud but pressed into his mind. All truths are illusions, all victories, preludes to defeat. You believe you know yourself, but how many lies have you wrapped in hope? Superman staggered as the environment convulsed. The towers melted, twisting into impossible spirals. The citizens split into flocks of avian demons, feathers turning into jagged blades, beaks gnashing with laughter. His parents grew taller, their bodies warping into shapes that shifted by the second, eyes multiplying, mouths speaking in languages never meant for mortals. He dropped to one knee, the pressure of the illusion dragging him down, his powers drained under the red sun, his vision hazed by shifting images of Lois crying out for help, of the Justice League falling before him, of Earth burning because of his failures. Coiled tighter. Join me, Kal-El. Lay down your burden. Let me guide you to a future where you need never fail again. His chest heaved, every muscle screaming against the weight. The temptation pressed like gravity. If he accepted, if he allowed himself to believe, the torment would end. He could live on Krypton reborn. He could hold his parents' hands and never let go. No, forcing himself. His eyes blazed defiantly, though the sun above sapped his strength. This is not Krypton, and you are not my father. The illusion rippled violently. His parents' forms twisted, their flesh dissolving into streams of light, their voices shrieking as the figure of Tzinch emerged, a silhouette of ever-shifting fire and feathers, its many eyes watching him from every angle. All lies are truths in waiting, the god hissed, and every truth can be rewritten. Clark's fists clenched. His voice was steady now, a rock in the shifting sea. I don't know what tricks you think will break me, but I know who I am. I'm the son of Krypton, the son of Earth, and no matter how many lies the truth will always be this. I will never. The plaza shattered like glass, reality snapping back around him. He fell forward onto the cold crystal floor of the Fortress of Solitude, gasping for breath, the phantom warmth of Krypton still clinging to him like a shadow. For a long moment he simply knelt there, shaken to his core. He had resisted, but doubt lingered like ash. How do you fight an enemy who can turn your very memories into weapons? The fortress vanished. One heartbeat ago, Superman had been kneeling on crystal floors, his breath ragged. Now he stood inside a corridor of endless length, walls made of mirrored glass that rippled like water. Each reflection showed him at different ages, an infant wrapped in cloth, a farm boy in Kansas, the man of tomorrow in his prime. With every step, the images shifted, as though his life were being rewritten with each blink. He turned, but the corridor twisted back into itself. What should have been a straight hall bent like a serpent. He tried to lift into the air, but the ceiling stretched upward infinitely, his flight dragging him in circles until he landed again at the same spot. Another trick, he muttered, fists clenched. His voice echoed back, distorted into whispers. Trick, truth, trick, truth. Shadows detached themselves from the mirrors, forming into creatures. Avian demons with wings of living fire and eyes glowing in unnatural hues crawled forward. Their bodies flickered, every movement blurring into 1,000 possible versions. One lashed at him with talons that tore through steel. Superman caught the strike, only to feel reality itself ripple at the contact. The corridor warped, bending sideways as though gravity had forgotten its rule. He fought on instinct, ducking a second claw, slamming a demon into the mirrored wall. The wall cracked, but instead of shattering, it bled, the glass dissolving into a storm of feathers that smothered him in shrieking voices. He tore free, heat vision cutting arcs of fire through the flurry. Demons fell, screeching, their bodies twisting into smoke. But as soon as one dissolved, two more. Every victory became another battle. Every strike looped into another trial. He punched through one creature's chest, only for its body to reform behind him. He melted another with heat vision, and its ashes reconstituted claws already reaching for his throat. It was a war with no end. Then came the illusion. Clark. He froze. The voice was familiar, steady, unyielding. From the smoke stepped Batman, cape flowing, cowl shadowed. You're failing. You can't fight this with strength. His eyes narrowed. Maybe you never could. Superman. Bruce? Batman's mouth split into a grin too wide, his jaw unhinging as feathers burst from beneath. His laughter twisted into shrieks as the figure collapsed into another demon. Superman crushed it, rage tight in his jaw. Another figure. Wonder Woman, sword gleaming, armor radiant. Cal, you're not alone, she said, voice filled with relief surged in his chest until her skin rippled, eyes splitting into dozens, blade curving into a serpent's tongue. She lunged, and he barely stopped her strike. The labyrinth was not testing his fists, it was testing his certainty. Superman steadied himself. He shut out the illusions, focused on his heartbeat. He thought of his parents' lessons, Lois's laughter, the countless faces he'd saved who had believed in him when no one else did. Truth. Hope. The words anchored him, a chain no deception could sever. With each breath, the demons faltered. Their shapes flickered, losing cohesion. The mirrored walls shook under a force deeper than fists, his will. Superman drove forward, punching through wall after wall, not with rage, with certainty. Cracks spread like lightning until the labyrinth shattered in a cascade of glass and fire. He stumbled out into open space once more, the fortress returning around him. The illusion had broken, the air clean and still again. For a moment, he felt victory. But then the laughter came. It was not the cackle of a demon, but a layered voice echoing across dimensions. You did well, Kryptonian. But every step you took, I foresaw. Every choice, every triumph, it was mine first. You cannot move outside my design. Superman's fists tightened. He lifted his chin, refusing to answer, but the whisper lingered like oil on water. Even in defiance, the thought gnawed at him. Had he resisted, or had he simply walked the path Tzinche had already written? The fortress shook as if struck by a quake. Crystals shivered, refracting light in patterns that bent into impossible shapes. Superman steadied himself, scanning the chamber. But the disturbance was not physical. It was intrusion, reality itself bending to admit something it should never host. From the air coalesced a shape. Fire and smoke folded into wings. Countless eyes blinked open across its form, staring in all directions. A mouth split into 1,000 whispering questions and answers at once. The figure shifted constantly, sometimes bird, sometimes man cloaked in regal feathers. It was an avatar of Tzinch, the architect of fate. You persist, the voices chorused, each one distinct yet part of a single. You resist illusions, yet illusions are all you are. A bundle of choices dressed as destiny. Tell me, Superman, what makes you real? Superman clenched his fists. I am who I choose to be, not what you decide. The entity laughed. Flames rose in spirals, the chamber distorted. Choice? Every choice is a trap I lay. Step left, you serve me. Step right, I am every possibility. The avatar moved, and the fortress shifted with it. Superman charged, striking with speed and force enough to crack mountains. His fists connected, yet instead of impact, the blow fractured into a dozen outcomes. In one, he struck true; in another, he missed entirely; in a third, his strike was turned aside by a wall of feathers. Each possibility overlapped, leaving him staggering in confusion. Tzinch countered with sorcery. Time fracture. Superman found himself fighting across multiple moments simultaneously, soaring into battle, standing bloodied in defeat, kneeling as a conqueror crowned in gold. Each version screamed for his attention, each a temptation to believe. The voices, even your victories are lies. Every tomorrow I have already written. You are a puppet done to a script you cannot. Superman gritted his teeth. He forced his mind to focus, shutting out the cacophony. I've heard this before. Tyrants, conquerors, gods, they all think they can decide the future. But the future is made by those who stand, who refuse to surrender. That's what makes it. He leapt again, heat vision blazing. The beams cut through spirals of shifting wing, burning through layers of probability. The avatar reeled, its form stuttering between shapes, dozens of eyes snapping shut. The counterattack came as a storm of paradox. Walls turned into oceans, then into void. Superman's body bent through loops of time, trapped in cycles where he punched, failed, and fell again. Whispers pressed into his ears. You are destined to fall. You are destined to serve. Even your defiance is mine. His breath came ragged, body aching as if time itself was tearing him apart. Yet in the chaos, he clung to the single truth that had carried him through every battle. He was not alone. Lois's smile, his parents' lessons, the faces of the countless lives he had saved, all of them anchored him. Not fate, not inevitability, people. With a roar, Superman broke free of the loops, his body snapping back into a single moment. He lunged, driving his fist straight into the Avatar. For a heartbeat, the god's manifestation wavered, flames sputtering, eyes dimming. The whispers faltered, then steadied. Impressive. But remember this, every path you take leads to me. Even now, your resistance only tightens my design. Your hope is a thread woven into my tapestry. And then the Avatar dissolved, retreating into smoke and whispers, leaving only silence behind. Superman fell to one knee, exhausted, sweat streaming down his face. He had forced Tzeentch's Avatar to retreat. It was a victory, but in the echo of the god's final word, doubt gnawed. Had he resisted, or simply played his part in a scheme already written? He rose slowly, cape torn but unbroken. Don't care. I'll make my own. Yet, as he looked out across the icy wastes beyond the fortress, shadows seemed longer than before. Somewhere in the warp, Tzeentch laughed, already waiting for the next move. Central City was unrecognizable. Superman descended through skies that had once glimmered with lightning-fast trains and shining spires, only to find them blotted by swarms of flies so dense they turned the daylight. Streets overflowed with sludge the color of rotting bile, rivers of pus streaming through avenues where children once played. The air carried a stench so thick it seared his lungs, bitter even to a Kryptonian who had breathed the vacuum of space. He landed in the heart of downtown, boots sinking into a surface that squelched beneath him. Buildings sagged under carpets of mold, their walls weeping fluid like infected wounds. The once proud Central City Police Department stood draped in vines of slime, its badge-shaped emblem corroded into an unrecognizable smear. And then came the voices. Grandfather loves us. Grandfather freed us. Grandfather gives us gifts. Superman turned to see citizens staggering through the filth. Skin bubbled with lesions, limbs swollen and grotesque. Yet their faces bore something worse than pain. They smiled. Parents clutched children whose bodies twisted with rot, cooing softly as if soothing fevers. An old man, blind with pus-filled sockets, reached out with trembling arms. He is kind, Kryptonian. He teaches us to let go. Clark's jaw tightened. This isn't kindness, he said, voice thick with restrained fury. This is corruption. The old man only laughed, phlegm rattling in his chest. You call it corruption. We call it love. From the alleys poured the demons, bloated things with bellies split open, intestines dragging behind them. Their skin oozed pus with every step, each motion releasing clouds of buzzing insects. Some carried rusted cleavers, others flailed with limbs studded in boils that burst upon contact. Their voices droned with mocking glee. Spread the gift. Spread the love. Superman charged. His fists smashed through one creature, but it burst into a cloud of flies, each bite sharp enough to pierce even his Kryptonian flesh. He coughed, heat vision erupting in an arc of fire that scorched swarms into ash. Yet for every demon destroyed, another lurched forward, belching disease into the air. His chest burned, his throat grew raw. For the first time, his Kryptonian resilience faltered, not against blades, but against rot. His knees buckled briefly, the edges of his vision blurring. He wiped bile from his lips, refusing to yield. He carried survivors when he could, pulling children from the sludge, shielding families from demon claws. Yet, many resisted. A mother slapped his hand away, clutching her mutated son tight. He is perfect, she whispered. Nurgle took his pain. The words struck harder than claws. Superman's greatest strength had always been hope, his ability to remind humanity of its better self. Now he faced people who no longer wanted saving, who embraced their own destruction. He set a boy down gently on a rooftop, though the child squirmed, begging to return to grandfather. Clark knelt before him, gripping his shoulders firmly yet tenderly. Listen to me. This isn't love. Love makes you, and I promise you, there is still more for you. The boy blinked, confusion flickering through milky eyes. Around them, demons shrieked, swarming closer. Superman rose, drawing the monster's attention. His voice thundered across the corrupted streets. You will not take this city. You will not take these people. They are not yours to claim. He threw himself into the battle, every movement a statement of defiance. Even weakened, coughing blood into the sludge, he fought on because where despair spread, his very presence was a spark. And for the first time, the chants faltered. Among the groans of devotion, some citizens hesitate, doubt breaking through the haze. Superman saw it in their eyes, faint but real, a flicker of resistance. He seized on it. You are stronger than this disease, stronger than this lie. Look at me. Look at what I stand for. If you can still hear me, then hope is still alive in. The demons screeched, furious, swarming him in waves. Their claws raked his chest, their bile hissed against his skin. But behind him, voices whispered, not in devotion to Nurgle, but in prayer for strength. The section ended not with victory, but with tension. Superman stood bloodied and breathless, surrounded on all sides, the city still drowning in filth. Yet in the mire, hope had stirred again. And that, he knew, was the one thing Nurgle could never truly own. Central City was no longer. Superman descended through the sky and nearly gagged as the air hit him, a choking miasma of rot, thick with the buzzing of flies. Below, entire districts had been consumed. Streets ran with bubbling rivers of yellow-green sludge, foaming with pus. Once-browed buildings sagged under a carpet of black mold that pulsed like diseased flesh. The city's heart had become a wound, open and festering. As he landed, the ground squelched beneath him. It was no longer stone but a soft, infected surface that oozed with each step. The symbol of the Central City Police Department hung above him, corroded into a streak of rust and slime. Superman's jaw tightened. He had seen destruction before, but never corruption that lived. Then came the voices. Grandfather loves us. Grandfather frees us. Grandfather gives us gifts. Out of the shadows staggered the people he had sworn to protect. Their skin was pale, covered in sores that wept up. Some dragged limbs swollen and twisted beyond recognition. Yet their faces were calm, smiling. Parents rocked children whose tiny bodies were already warped with boils, whispering lullabies as if nothing were wrong. An old man reached out toward Superman, blind sockets dripping with filth. You see now, Kryptonian, he is kind. He teaches us to stop fighting. Superman shook his. This isn't kindness. This is surrender. The man laughed, his chest rattling with phlegm. You call it corruption. We call it love. The air split with a chorus of laughter, wet, guttural, mocking. From alleys and ruined doors lumbered Nurgle's demons. Their swollen bellies split open with every step, spilling intestines that slivered like worms. Rusted cleavers hung from their hands, dripping with slime. Clouds of flies erupted around them, each one biting with venom sharp enough to pierce even Superman's skin. He surged forward, heat vision blazing. The beams cut through their bloated form, but each explosion of rot only released more insect, more spores. He coughed as bile rose in his throat, vision blurring for a heartbeat. His Kryptonian body, resilient against nearly everything, faltered for the first time against a plague not of science, but of chaos. Still, he fought. He ripped demons apart with fists that cracked bone and shattered pustules. Every strike coated him in slime, burning against his skin. He shielded survivors when he could, lifting children from the sludge, pulling families onto rooftops. Yet not all wanted to be saved. A mother slapped his hand away, clutching her son tighter as his face split with boils. Don't take him, she begged. Grandfather made him perfect. He doesn't hurt anymore. The words pierced deeper than any claw. Superman staggered, heart pounding. What enemy had he ever faced who convinced people to choose their own decay? He knelt before a young boy, holding his trembling shoulders. Listen to me, he said, voice steady despite the rot pressing in around them. This isn't love. Love doesn't take from, it gives. You still have more to give, more to live for. The boy blinked, confusion flickering in clouded eyes. Behind them, the demons howled, hurling their cleavers, swarm pressed closer. Superman rose to meet them, every movement a defiance of the despair they spread. You will not take this city, his voice echoing through the filth. You will not take these. They are not yours. The demons crashed against him, claws raking, teeth gnashing. He staggered under the weight, coughing blood into the slime, but he did not fall. Around him, the chant faltered. Among the broken citizens, some turned their eyes upward, not to Nurgle, but to him. Their whispers shifted, trembling but alive. Maybe we can fight. Maybe he's right. Superman pressed forward, battered, covered in rot and blood, yet unbowed. He had not won. Not yet. Central City is still drowning in corruption, but hope had flickered in them, and that was something Nurgle could never truly claim. The deeper Superman pushed into Central City, the more the corruption thickened. Buildings sagged like diseased lungs, windows dripping with mucus. Roads pulsed beneath his feet as if alive, veins of pus splitting open to release waves of insects. At the city's core, the air grew darker, heavier, until every breath seared his chest. From the filth emerged the plague-bearers, emaciated figures with single glowing eyes, horns jutting from their skulls, their skeletal frames covered in sores. Each carried a rusted blade that dripped disease. They moved in a lurching rhythm, chanting in guttural voices, count, 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 tallying each victim as if existence itself was a ledger of rot. Superman dove into them, fists swinging in controlled arcs. Every blow crushed bone, scattered ichor, sent bodies tumbling into the sludge. But with each strike, new wounds opened, not just on them, but on him. A talon grazed his arm, and a blister spread instantly across his skin. Another blade nicked his side, and fever surged through his veins like fire. His healing fought it, but the warp was relentless, embedding sickness into every cell. And then the ground shook. A shadow blotted out the corrupted sky as something vast emerged from the mire. The great unclean one lumbered into view, its bulk dwarfing skyscrapers. Its skin sagged like a melted candle. Its belly split open to reveal organs crawling with maggots. With every step, the earth quaked, and its laughter, deep, wet, phlegmy, echoed through the broken city. Superman flew at it with all his might. His fists slammed into the demon's flesh, but instead of damage, each strike tore open new wounds that spilled rivers of pus and swarms of flies. The air thickened with buzzing, suffocating him as the creatures swarmed his eyes, mouth, and ears. He gagged, coughing blood into the swarm, his lungs burning as though filled with acid. The demon's hand, swollen and dripping with slime, swung with the weight of a collapsing building. Superman raised his arms to block, but the blow hurled him through a skyscraper already half-rotted, the structure collapsing around him in a storm of stone and filth. He clawed his way free, blistered and gasping, yet still standing. He roared and charged again, ignoring the rot spreading across his arms. He slammed into the monster's belly, tearing through layers of rancid flesh. The great unclean one shrieked in delight rather than pain, spewing clouds of plagues. "Yes, little champion," it bellowed, its voice like a chorus. "Take my gift. Despair with me." Superman's vision dimmed. His knees trembled. For the first time he wondered if he could fall, not from a stronger fist, but from rot that even his body could not repel. And yet, as he staggered, he caught sight of survivors huddled in the shadows. Their faces were pale, broken, but their eyes were fixed on him. Even as he coughed blood, they whispered, "He's still fighting." That was enough. He pushed through the agony, igniting every reserve of strength. With a primal roar, he lifted the demon, its putrid body writhing, spilling filth across the city, and carried it upward, straining with every fiber of his being. Flies consumed his cape, sores blistered across his skin, but he kept climbing, past the choking cloud, through the black swarm, into the clarity of orbit. The sun's light bathed him. The great unclean one writhed and screamed, its rotting flesh bubbling under pure solar radiation. Superman, barely conscious, forced the creature higher, holding it until its body split apart into a cloud of spores that disintegrated in the light. He collapsed back toward Earth, crashing into the streets below with enough force to crater the ground. His suit was torn, his skin blistered and scarred, his breath shallow. Yet he rode. The city was still broken, still drenched in filth, but survivors crawled from the ruin, their eyes wide with something fragile and precious. Hope. If Superman could still fight, then maybe they could too. The streets of Central City lay in silence after the great unclean one's destruction, but it was not the silence of peace. Buildings still sagged with rot, the stench of plague still hung thick, and survivors clung to one another with hollow eyes. Superman stood in the ruins, his body trembling, lungs raw, sores burning along his arms. He could feel the disease lingering in him like fire under the skin. For a moment he thought it was over. Then the air grew heavy again. A voice slithered into his ears, low and rasping, yet filled with grotesque warmth. "Poor child. You bleed, you cough, you suffer. They will only fall again. The rot comes for all things. Why not rest?" Superman's head turned sharply, scanning the streets, but there was no form to strike. The presence was everywhere, seeping from the slime on walls, the buzzing of flies, the very air he... Nurgle was not here in body, but in spirit, pressing his whispers into every corner of the city. Visions flooded his mind. Lois, aging and sick, coughing in a hospital bed as her body withered no matter how many times he tried to save her. Cities crumbling again and again, rebuilt only to rot once more. Humanity fighting wars that ended in graves, no victory everlasting. He saw himself kneeling amid endless ruins, powerless as the universe decayed around him. You fight for nothing. Every tomorrow will crumble. Every hope will sour. Join me, and you will be free of burden, free of grief. Rest, Kal-El. Accept the gift. Superman staggered, clutching his chest. His knees nearly buckled as the despair pressed harder, heavier than the great unclean one's bulk. For the first time he wondered if it was true, if all his battle, all his sacrifices, were only pauses before inevitable loss. He could feel the temptation of surrender, the quiet lure of release. But then his gaze fell on the survivors around him. A young girl clung to her father, eyes wide with fear but still watching him. An old woman reached for his hand, whispering a shaky prayer. Dozens of people, broken and scarred, looked to him not for miracle, but for strength. His fists tightened. He forced air into his lungs, ignoring the burn, ignoring the sores that split his skin. His voice rang out, hoarse but unshaken. As long as there is even one life left to save, I will. As long as there is hope, I will never surrender. The survivors stirred. The father lifted his daughter higher, clutching her against his chest. The old woman raised her voice, whispering through cracked lips, "He still stands. We can too." Soon, others echoed her. Murmurs grew louder, turning into cries of defiance against the rot. The city itself seemed to push back. The buzzing flies dispersed. The air, still foul, lost its suffocating weight. Nurgle's voice rumbled with a chuckle, deep and mute. "Brave words, little champion. But even hope rots in time. I will wait. I will. And when the last ember fades, you will be mine." The presence receded, dragging with it the stench of inevitability, but leaving behind a cold echo in Superman's mind. He stood in the ruins, shoulders heavy, chest heaving, his body broken but his will intact. He turned to the people, nodding once, silently promising that he would not leave them to despair. Then he took to the skies, cape tattered, his frame limping against the wind. Victory had been won, but at a cost that left scars deeper than any wound. Above him, the clouds swirled unnaturally, whispering of what was to come. Slonish's shadow was already moving. The world opened in light. Superman blinked, and the ruins of Central City were gone. In their place rose crystalline spires that caught the red sun and refracted it into shimmering rainbows. The air smelled sharp and clean, laced with the faint hum of technology perfected beyond imagination. Birds of impossible color danced across the sky. And for the first time since childhood, Clark felt no weight pressing against his chest. He looked down at his hands, unscarred, strong, steady. His cape hung behind him, not torn but pristine. A voice called Kal-El. He turned, heart hammering. Jor-El and Lara stood before him, alive and whole, their faces radiant with pride. His father's hand clasped his shoulder, solid and warm. His mother's smile carried no sorrow, only joy. Behind them, crowds of Kryptonians filled the streets, their robes flowing, their eyes bright. They cheered his name, chanting not as subjects but as family. Krypton live. Tears blurred his vision. He had dreamed of this moment countless times in the silence of the fortress, in the emptiness of space, in the battles that left him alone. Krypton restored, not as memory, not as illusion, but living, breathing reality. The ache in his heart eased as he let himself breathe the impossible. His parents led him through the shining city. Towers stretched higher than any on Earth, technology pulsed with life, and no fear, no hatred, no despair clouded the air. Every face smiled as he passed, every voice lifted in harmony. For the first time, Superman felt home, truly home. And yet, even in the joy, unease lingered. He noticed symbols carved into the spires, unfamiliar at first, then disturbingly clear. A curling spiral, elegant and entrancing, repeated over every arch, every street, every robe. The crest of the House of El still adorned his chest, but when he glanced again, its lines seemed to shift, bending toward the spiral. "Do you see?" Jor-El, his voice echoing strength. "This is what you were meant for. Krypton is thriving. Your people are restored. No endless suffering, no wars, only peace, only joy." Lara's hands cupped his face, her touch featherlight, almost too soft. "Stay, Kal. Rest. You've given enough." The crowd closed in, voices lifting, chanting his name. Kal-El, 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 their words weaving into the spiral's rhythm. For a heartbeat, he wanted nothing more than to lay down the burden of protector, savior, symbol. To live as a son, as one of his people, without fear of tomorrow's battles. But then he saw it. The joy in their eyes was too sharp, their smiles too wide, stretched past humanity into hunger. A child pressed a flower into, but when he glanced down, the petals writhed, twisting into tongue. He dropped it, and the crowd did not notice. They only cheered louder. This was no Krypton. This was a lure. The spiral on the spire pulsed, glowing faintly, and he heard the whisper, sultry and insidious. "This can all be yours. Every loss is undone. Every sorrow All you must do is surrender, Kal-El. Choose what you have always desired. His fists tightened, his breath caught, trembling between longing and fury. He looked at his parents, perfect and smiling, and the pain nearly crushed him. He wanted to believe more than anything, but deep in his chest, beneath the ache of longing, truth stirred. "This isn't real," he said, voice breaking. The city flickered. For an instant, the spires sagged into flesh, the people's smiles splitting wider into screams. His parents' eyes glowed with unnatural light, their skin rippling. The spiral blazed above them, wrapping the sky. "This isn't Krypton. This isn't lie." The whispers pressed harder, desperate, tempting. "Stay. Be ours." Superman closed his eyes, his voice steady even as his heart shattered. "I will never trade truth for desire. I will never abandon Earth for illusion. Krypton may be gone, but its hope lives through me. And that hope belongs to everyone, not just me." The vision fractured like glass. The spires collapsed, the spiral shattered, and the cheering crowd dissolved into smoke. He fell forward, gasping, back onto the cold floor of the Fortress of Solitude. Alone. The dream of Krypton still burned in his chest like an ember he longed to, but he had resisted. He had chosen sacrifice over selfishness. And yet, as silence closed around him, one thought lingered. Part of him had wanted it. The fortress dissolved around him again, and Superman found himself standing on the balcony of a gleaming citadel. Below stretched Earth, not broken or scarred, but perfected. Cities shone like jewels, their streets clean and orderly. Towering farms stretched green across deserts once barren. Oceans sparkled free of pollution, and skies bore no scars of war. Everywhere, people walked with smiles. No hunger, no pain, no crime. For the first time in memory, Earth was at peace. And above it all, his symbol, the crest of the House of El, shone from every tower. Lois appeared at his side, her hand warm in his, her eyes radiant with youth untouched by time. She leaned against him with easy grace, whispering, "You've done it. You've saved everyone. This you were meant for." His heart ached. Was this what it could be? No more waiting for disasters, no more endless battles, no more innocent lives slipping through his fingers because he was too late. Here, he had ended suffering, not by fighting, but by ruling. The crowd below looked up at him. Their voices rose in unison, "Kal-El, Kal-El, Kal-El." The sound rolled across the horizon like thunder, reverent, unwavering. For a moment, pride swelled in his chest. He could feel the temptation sink its claws deeper. What if this was... What if he had always been holding back? With his power, he could stop every war before it began. He could end hunger, disease, injustice. He could create paradise. Lois's fingers traced the edge of his jaw. "This is the destiny you've denied. Why let them stumble when you can guide every step? Why watch them fall when you could lift them forever?" His eyes scanned the crowd again, searching. And that was when he noticed it. Their smiles were uniform, their eyes glassy. They did not cheer with joy, but with compulsion. Their adoration was not love freely given, it was obedience. Their lives were safe, but empty. Every gesture, every word, bent toward him. Humanity was thriving, yes, but only as worshippers, not as people. The realization struck like ice. "This isn't freedom," he whispered. "This is slavery." The illusion pressed harder. Lois turned to face him, her beauty magnified beyond reason, her voice a melody of reassurance. "And what is freedom, Cal? Is it the right to suffer, the right to kill each other, to starve, to despair? You could take all that away. You could make them happy, even if they don't choose it. Isn't that worth it?" Superman's fists clenched. He could almost believe her. How many lives could he save if he simply accepted? How much suffering would never exist? The weight crushed down on him, whispering that this was not tyranny but mercy. He looked at Lois, then at the endless city, at the sea of faces chanting his name. And his voice broke through, steady despite the tremor in his heart. "No, a world without choice isn't a world at all. Hope only matters if it's chosen. If I take their freedom, then I've already lost everything I stand for." The cheers faltered, the city wavered. Lois's hand slipped from his, her perfect face cracking, revealing the spiral symbol pulsing beneath her skin. The illusion splintered like glass under a hammer, collapsing into shards of light. Superman fell back into the fortress, knees hitting the crystal floor, chest heaving. The perfection was gone, leaving only silence, and the memory of how close he had come to embracing. He whispered to himself, voice ragged, "I can't be there, I can only be their friend." Yet the doubt lingered, burning deep. Did he refuse because of his ideals, or because he feared what he might become if he accepted? The fortress shimmered, its crystalline walls bending as though made of liquid light. From that brilliance emerged a figure, tall, radiant and shifting, masculine and feminine, angelic and monstrous, beautiful and terrible all at once. Its skin gleamed like polished marble, its eyes pools of endless longing. Every movement was poetry. Every breath promised release. Superman felt his chest tighten. This was no illusion of Krypton, no fantasy of power. This was Slaanesh itself, the embodiment of every secret desire given form. Kal-El, the god whispered, its voice like silken thunder. You have borne so much. You bleed for a world that will never stop needing. Let it end. Let me give you peace. The light shifted, and Lois appeared. She stepped forward, untouched by age, her eyes filled with love that cut deeper than any wound. She reached for him, her voice trembling with tenderness. Clark, you don't have to carry this. We can be together forever. No loss, no pain. His breath caught. Every fiber of him screamed to hold her, to surrender. For an instant, he let himself imagine it, her laugh echoing in fields untouched by war, her hand always in his, no fear of tomorrow tearing her away. Slaanesh's eyes gleamed, sensing the crack. You deserve this. After all you've done, after all you've lost, why deny yourself? Love is eternal, peace unending. Is that not the truest gift? Superman trembled. His fists clenched, his eyes stung. He had faced gods, armies, horrors beyond imagination, but this temptation of love fulfilled, was the hardest trial of all. For a heartbeat he wanted it more than victory, more than hope. He wanted her. But then he closed his eyes, drawing in a shuddering breath. When he opened them again, his voice was steady, though filled with pain. No, love isn't love if it's stolen from time. Life isn't precious if it never ends. Lois's smile matters because it's fragile. Humanity matters because they choose. Because every moment is fleeting. If I take this from them or from myself, I destroy the very thing I'm fighting for. Lois's image faltered, her perfect face flickering, eyes turning glassy. She reached again, but her touch dissolved into light. The radiant god's smile twisted into a snarl, beauty cracking to reveal hunger. Foolish child, Slaanesh, its voice splitting into 1,000 tones of extant fury. You resist now, but you longed for it. You felt it, and that longing is mine. Part of you already belongs to me. The god's form shattered into shards of light and shadow, retreating into the warp with a shriek that shook the fortress. Silence crashed down, leaving only the sound of Superman's ragged breath. He fell to one knee, head bowed, tears burning in his eyes. He had resisted, but the truth stung. Part of him had wanted to stay. Part of him had yearned for the gift, even as he rejected. Slowly, his body trembled, his spirit scarred, but his will held. He whispered into the silence, "Sacrifice defines me, not desire. As long as I can give." The fortress stood quiet, its crystals reflecting his weary figure. He turned away, cape torn and heavy, carrying not triumph but the weight of temptation resisted. Yet as he stepped into the cold light of day, Slaanesh's whisper echoed faintly in his mind, a reminder that even the strongest heart still longed. The first tremors came with the sound of war horns, low, guttural blasts that shook the horizon. Then the earth split, not with plague or illusion, but with fire and brass. Rifts tore across the skies above earth, vomiting rivers of molten blood that cascaded into the streets below. From those rivers rose legions clad in crimson and gold, their armor dented with the scars of countless wars, their blades thirsting with an unnatural hunger. The bloodletters marched, rank upon rank, their snarling faces twisted with endless rage. They carried hell-forged swords that glowed as if quenched in slaughter itself, their every step leaving the pavement cracked and bleeding. Around them, demonic engines roared, colossal constructs of brass and bone, grinding gears spitting fire as they trampled skyscrapers into rubble. The cities burned in minutes, skies blackened, flames consuming skylines, smoke choking the heavens. Where Nurgle had brought rot and Slaanesh had brought temptation, Khorne brought only war, raw and unrelenting. Superman streaked through the firestorm, his cake torn by heat, his eyes blazing red. He struck like thunder, slamming into the first wave with fists that shattered bone and armor alike. Bloodletters scattered like leaves under a hurricane, their bodies flung into rivers of gore. His heat vision lanced through engines of brass, searing their cores until they exploded in storms of molten shrapnel. But for every demon he destroyed, 10 more clawed their way. The blood tide only thickened. A massive juggernaut, horned, armored, its hooves crushing the street into dust, charged through downtown, scattering civilians like insects. Superman intercepted it mid-sprint, his arms locking around its horns. The force sent shockwaves through the ground, glass shattering across blocks. With a roar, he heaved, flipping the beast onto its side and slamming it into the concrete hard enough to crater the street. Yet even broken, the juggernaut bellowed with rage, its eyes burning with unyielding fury. Above, a brass scorpion, a demon engine of titanic scale, scuttling on metallic legs tipped with blades, descended upon the skyline. Its claws carved through towers as if they were paper, its cannon vomiting molten blood across districts. Superman rocketed upward, tearing through its armor with fists and heat, ripping engines apart until the beast collapsed in a storm of flame. Still, the tide did not falter. Every civilian who fell, every drop of blood spilled, seemed to strengthen the horde. Superman saved dozens, hundreds, lifting people from collapsed buildings, shielding them with his own body from blades and fire. But for every life saved, more were lost. The cycle was endless, every scream another hymn to Khorne. Exhaustion clawed at him. Sweat stung his eyes, his breath came ragged. For all his Kryptonian might, even he felt the drag of ceaseless. His fists split demons apart, his vision cut through their hordes, but nothing stemmed the tide. Each victory hollowed into futility as the red flood surged again. On the blood-soaked streets, civilians cried out, their voices drowning in the thunder of war. Superman's heart ached with each scream, but his body moved without pause. He fought, not for triumph, but for survival, for every life he could still snatch from the jaws of annihilation. And still, the horns sounded. From the rift above, the voice came, deep, savage, unyielding. It shook the world, every syllable drenched in rage and glory. You are mine. Superman froze for only an instant, the sound reverberating his bones. He looked up, past the fire, into the tier in the heavens. Beyond it burned a throne of brass, mountains of skulls piled at its feet, rivers of blood spilling endlessly down. There, in shadow, loomed the figure of Khorne. He had not yet stepped into Superman's, but his gaze alone was enough to make the skies burn red. The tide surged harder. The bloodletters howled his name. Every blade lifted, every war cry screamed, was now aimed at him. He was no longer just a warrior on the battlefield. He was the prize, the offering, the one Khorne sought to claim as his greatest champion. Superman clenched his fists, blood and ash coating his skin. His chest heaved with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with defiance. He would not be Khorne's weapon. But as the red tide thickened and the streets drowned in slaughter, one truth pressed against his heart. Fighting war itself meant risking becoming war incarnate. From the chaos of the battlefield, where rivers of blood boiled and demons howled their endless war chants, a shadow rose. It was larger than the bloodletters, larger than any juggernaut or demon engine Superman had faced. A towering figure strode forward, every step leaving the ground scorched and cracked. Clad in spiked brass armor, his presence burned hotter than the fires around him. Horns jutted from his helm, his crimson cloak dragging through the gore-soaked streets. In his hands he carried a massive axe forged of black iron and demon fire, its blade whispering promises of slaughter. The horde fell silent as the warrior pointed the weapon at Superman. His voice thundered like a war drum. Kal-El of Earth, the gods have marked you. You are the worthiest foe I will ever face. Today we carve your name into the ledger of blood. Superman narrowed his eyes, fists clenched, cape billowing in the heat of burning streets. If you think I'll let you turn this world into a battlefield, you'll have to get through me. The champion roared, and the duel began. The first swing of the demon axe split the air, its edge sparking against Superman's crossed arm. The force hurled him through a collapsed building, stone and steel collapsing as he tore free. Superman launched upward, striking with a punch that cracked the champion's chest. The warrior only laughed, a guttural, brutal sound. Good, you have the strength. Now show me the kill. Blow after blow shook the city. The champion's axe cut through streets like butter, its edge singing with every swing. Superman countered with speed, dodging strikes that would have leveled entire blocks, his fists hammering into armor again and again. Each hit dented brass, split metal, drew black ichor, but the champion never slowed. His rage was endless, his strength renewed with every strike. The warrior pressed harder, his voice booming through the din of battle. You waste your power, Kryptonian. Every strike begs for death, but you deny it. Why hold back? Why not end me? Superman blocked another swing, the axe's blade carving sparks from his skin. His jaw tightened, fury burning at the edges of his restraint. Around him, civilians screamed, demons fed, and blood spilled. The temptation to unleash everything, to end this warrior once and for all, gnawed at him, but he refused. I don't, Superman. His voice strained. If I do, I will become what you. The champion roared, striking harder, his blows like falling meteor. Then you are weak. War is the truth. Blood is life. Every god, every mortal, strike me down and prove you are worthy of Khorne's gaze. The battle surged across blocks, their clash echo like thunder. Superman caught the axe mid-swing, twisting it free in a shower of sparks, then drove his fist into the champion's jaw. The impact sent the armored behemoth crashing into the pavement, leaving a crater of shattered stone. The warrior staggered up, laughing even through blood. Yes, that's it. Finish me. He spread his arms, offering his chest, daring the final blow. Take your place as the warlord you were born to be. Superman's fists shook, his breath ragged, fury boiling inside him. Every instinct screamed to end it, to silence this monster for. But then he saw faces, human faces, watching from the rubble, survivors, terrified yet clinging to him as their symbol. What would they see if he chose? He stepped back, dropping the axe at the warrior's feet. His voice rang clear. I will never be your executioner. I fight to protect, not to slaughter. The champion froze, stunned into silence. Then rage exploded from him, his roar shaking the heavens. You deny me my death? You shame me before Khorne? He charged again, but Superman moved faster, grappling, locking him in an unbreakable hold, slamming him into the ground with the force of an earthquake. The warrior thrashed, screamed, cursed, but Superman held firm, subduing him without killing. The battlefield quaked with the fury of Khorne himself. The skies turned blue-red, the rivers boiling hotter. Superman looked upward, sweat and blood running down his face, knowing he had just defied the very essence of the god of war. He had won the duel, but not the war. The champion lay broken in the crater, his armor split, his roars fading into silence. Superman stood over him, chest heaving, sweat and blood streaking his face. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the battlefield itself had quieted. The bloodletters hesitate, their endless cries faltering as though the duel had stolen their momentum. Then the sky tore open. Darkness was replaced by a river of crimson light, pouring across the heavens like a second sun bleeding into existence. Clouds ignited, not with fire but with rivers of blood that cascaded downward, drenching streets already drowned in carnage. From the rift emerged a shadow so vast it dwarfed mountain. Khorne, the god of blood and skulls, his silhouette blotted, horns stretched like towers of brass, his throne of skulls shimmering in the storm above. His voice rolled across reality itself, deeper than earthquakes, louder than thunder, tearing into the hearts of every living being. You dare deny me, Kryptonian. The sound cracked buildings, split the earth, shattered glass across entire continent. Civilians dropped to their knees, covering their ears as their minds buckled under the weight of his fury. Even Superman staggered, the vibration shuddering through his bones. You deny blood. You deny slaughter. Then I shall drown your world in it until you understand. Until you. The bloodletters howled as one, renewed, their blades clashing against the ruined streets. Demon engines roared louder, juggernauts stomped harder, their frenzy doubling under the gaze of their god. Superman looked up, battered and trembling, yet unbowed. His voice cracked, but his words rang clear. You can send every army, every storm, every nightmare, but I will not become your weapon. I will not kill for you. The colossal hand of Khorne, wreathed in flame and brass, vast enough to eclipse entire district, descended from the rift. Its shadow smothered the city, its sheer weight threatening to crush everything beneath. Superman launched upward, slamming his body against it. The impact rattled the earth, buildings collapsing under the shockwave. He felt his bones scream, his muscles tear. The sheer force threatened to pulverize him, pressing harder than any mountain, hotter than any star. He grit his teeth, every ounce of strength pouring into his arms as he pushed back against the hand of a god. Stand, mortal, Khorne growled. Stand and fall. You are mine. Superman roared, the sound tearing his throat raw. His heat vision flared, cutting through the crimson storm. His fists hammered against the impossible hand, his will pushing back against the essence of endless war itself. For a moment, impossibly, the descent slowed. The hand trembled. The city beneath him survived, not crushed, but shielded by his defiance. The god bellowed, fury shaking the sky. You resist, but war is eternal. You will fight until you drown in blood. You cannot escape me. And with that, the hand withdrew, retreating back into the rift. The blood-red storm dimmed, though the sky remained scarred, stained with streaks of crimson that would not fade. The bloodletters shrieked one last time before dissolving into smoke, their war cries echoing as they vanished. The battlefield fell into silence once more, broken only by the sobs of survivors and the crackle of fire. Superman hovered above the ruins, body trembling, vision blurred, his cape shredded to tatters. He had not won, not truly. He had only endured. He descended slowly, landing among the broken streets, civilians staring at him with awe and fear. Even in victory, the weight of what they had seen pressed heavily. Earth itself had drawn the attention of. Superman looked to the bleeding sky, his fists clenched. Not for them, for himself. I'll fight. No matter the cost, no matter how many battles, I will never be yours. Above him, the rift closed, but not in silence. A final growl reverberated through the void, shaking the air with its promise. War never ends, Kryptonian. One day, you will even kneel in blood. Superman stared upward, his jaw set. The war was far from over. The gods were not done, and he knew with a clarity that chilled him that the greatest battles had yet to come. The sky tore apart, not with the singular presence of one god, but with the convergence of all four. The heavens became a battlefield of divine hatred, each corner of the firmament claimed by a different hue. From the north, the skies bled crimson as rivers of fire rained down in Khorne's name. From the east, reality itself fractured into impossible spirals. Tezinte's kaleidoscopic illusions warping entire cities to shifting nightmare. From the south, a choking fog of pestilence spread. Nurgle's plagues devouring forests, rivers, and streets in grotesque rot. And from the west, whispers poured into the minds of every living soul, Slamish's honeyed promises weaving into desire so sharp it burned. Earth was no longer a planet, it was an altar. Superman soared into the storm, his cape whipping in the chaos, his eyes burning with defiance. Below him, the world drowned, skyscrapers collapsed into rivers of blood. Oceans boiled with demonic leviathans, and streets twisted into labyrinths of warped geometry. Every step of humanity's world had become part of the warp's encroachment. The four powers pressed at once. Khorne's legions surged first, the bloodletters marching in relentless ranks. Their blades clanged against one another, their chants reverberated. Blood for the blood, skulls for the skull. Superman slammed into their lines like a living comet, scattering ranks with blows that cracked the ground for miles. His heat vision scythed through demons by the hundreds, but still they came, endless as a tide. Even as he fought, the world bent beneath him. Streets folded in on themselves, looping into infinity, skyscrapers twisted into staircases that climbed into nowhere. Tezinte's illusions turned allies into enemies, soldiers seeing one another as demons. Superman froze mid-punch as a figure resembling Lois appeared before him, pleading for help, only to morph into a shrieking avian horror. He shut his eyes and struck through the illusion, his faith in truth guiding his hand. Then the air thickened, sour and wet. Nurgle's plague surged through the battlefield, rotting steel, crumbling stone, and eating flesh and bones. Superman felt his lungs burn, his skin blistering beneath his suit, every breath carrying the weight of decay. Around him, humans fell, crying out to Grandfather in tones of eerie devotion. Superman swooped down, shielding them with his own body, carrying them from the infection's grasp even as sores spread across his arms. And above it all, Slanesh whispered. The voices came from nowhere and everywhere, each word a caress, each promise cutting deeper than any blade. Lay down your burden, Kal-El. Be with her again. Be whole. Be adored. The temptation pierced him, 1,000 visions crowding his mind. A Krypton restored, a Lois eternal, a universe without need for sacrifice. His heart quaked under the weight of it. For a moment, he faltered. And then he saw them. On the ground, a group of soldiers fought desperately against demonic beasts, coughing blood yet still pulling triggers. Families clutched one another, refusing to bow to the warp's whispers. A boy stood in the ruins, holding a tattered red cloth like a flag, his eyes fixed on Superman above. Hope, fragile but real, flickered in the chaos. Superman roared, the sound cutting through the storm, louder than the chant, louder than the whispers. He hurled himself into the maelstrom with renewed fury, fighting not for victory but for every spark of defiance below. He ripped bloodletters, tore through demonic engines, burned away plague clouds with his heat vision, and shattered illusions with the force of his will. The gods pressed harder, their powers overlapping into an apocalypse. Oceans rose and boiled into blood. Forests bloomed with pustules that burst into swarms. Cities twisted into spirals of flesh and brass. The fourfold storm sought to erase Earth itself, and yet Superman stood. Alone against gods, he was the bulwark. Each breath ragged, each muscle trembling, yet he did not fall. His very presence screamed one truth into the storm. Earth is not yours. The gods' voices converged, shaking reality. You cannot stand forever, Kryptonian. Against us united, you will drown. Superman's eyes burned red, his fists raised. His voice rang out, steady and defiant. Maybe I can't stand forever, but I will stand long enough for them to rise. And as he spoke, humanity rose, soldiers fighting harder, civilians resisting whispers, survivors clinging to life not with despair, but with stubborn, burning hope. The fourfold storm raged, but Superman and the people of Earth refused to kneel. The storm grew heavier. Superman had fought wars, gods, tyrants, and nightmares, but never had he felt weight like this. His fists were bloodied, his lungs raw, his cape shredded to ribbons. Every muscle screamed. Yet the battle did not relent. The Chaos Gods pressed harder, each force cutting at him from a different wound. Tezinche struck first, not with fire or blade, but with thought. A psychic storm tore through Superman's mind, visions erupting. He saw himself crowned as Earth's ruler, humanity kneeling before him in chains. He saw Krypton reborn, only to collapse again in flames while his people cursed his name. He saw Lois's eyes go cold. You failed us. Each vision overlapped, twisting memory and prophecy until truth blurred. His mind staggered, his grip on reality trembling. As he faltered, Nurgle's hand spread its rot. Boils erupted across his arms, his breath grew shallow, and a fever spread through him faster than his Kryptonian healing could purge. Each cough burned like acid, each blister tore open as he swung his fist. His body, once invincible, groaned under decay. Slaanesh slithered in, her voice, sweet and terrible, wrapped around his heart like silk chains. Lay it down, Kal-El. Be happy. You could have it all, the love you crave, the peace you deserve. Why bleed for those who will only suffer again? The visions returned, Lois alive forever, humanity thriving without war, himself free of burden. The desire bit sharper than pain, gnawing at the edges of his will. And through it all, Khorne roared. Champion after champion surged forward, towering bloodthirsters with axes burning in warp fire, juggernauts crashing through building, legions chanting his name. Each strike shook Superman's bones, each blow another hammer on the anvil of his body. His strength answered every one, but exhaustion turned his swings slower, his defenses weaker. The assault converged. Mind, body, heart, and spirit all assaulted at once. Visions of failure tore at his mind. Disease ate at his skin. Desire whispered in his ear. Rage battered his body. Superman staggered, his knees striking cracked pavement, his fists trembling against the ground. The red tide swelled. For the first time he felt it, the possibility of defeat. The world watched. Across Earth, cameras broadcast the sight, the invincible protector, brought to his knees, surrounded by horrors beyond comprehension. Families huddled together, children wept, soldiers faltered. If Superman could fall, what hope was left for anyone? The Chaos Gods pressed harder, their voices converging like thunder. Fall, surrender. His head bowed, his breath ragged. The temptation to give in, to let the storm wash him away, was overwhelming. Then, amid the noise, came memories. Not of gods, not of battles, but of faces. The smile of a boy he once saved from a burning building. The tears of a mother clutching her child as he set them down safely. The gratitude of strangers who had whispered, "Thank you, Superman," not as a title but as a prayer. And Lois, her laugh, her love, her belief that Clark Kent was as important as Superman. They were not gods. They were not warriors. They were ordinary, fragile, mortal. And yet they endured. They got back up every day, no matter the weight. If they could stand, how could he do less? He pressed his palms against the ground, forcing himself upright. Muscles torn, fever raging, whispers clawing at his ears, yet he rose. His voice was hoarse, broken, but unshaken. As long as life endures, hope endures, and as long as hope endures, I will fight. The battle trembled with the word. Humanity watching from their homes, from bunkers, from ruined cities, felt their hearts stir. The whispers of chaos wavered, faltering as new cries rose, not of surrender, but of defiance. Superman stood, battered but unbroken, a lone figure against gods united. And yet, in that moment, he was more than one man. He was hope made flesh. The battlefield still burned, rivers of blood carving through streets, the stench of plague hanging thick, illusions warping at the edges of sight. Superman stood in the center of it all, his body trembling, his cape little more than a tattered banner, his breath ragged, but he stood. And in that moment, something shifted. A soldier, coughing blood, lifted his rifle again. "If he's not giving up," he muttered, "then neither am I." He fired into the oncoming tide, his voice rising in a hoarse battle cry. Others followed. soldiers rallying around his defiance, their despair burning into resolve. Civilians who had cowered in rubble began to move. A mother clutched her child and shouted at a cultist who urged her to surrender. "No, you don't own us. You'll never own us." Her cry spread, echoing across the ruins like lightning through dry wood. And then, the unthinkable. Among the ranks of cultists themselves, some faltered. They looked at the man in red, broken yet unyielding, and something inside them cracked. One dropped his blade, shaking his head as whispers of the gods faltered in his mind. Another backed away, muttering, "If he resists them, maybe we can too." Superman saw it. He felt it. The spark. His fists clenched, his jaw set. He realized then that his purpose was not simply to fight, not to win alone against gods who had conquered galaxies. His role was to ignite, to show that no matter how overwhelming the storm, even one man refusing to bend could awaken resistance in countless others. The warp itself shuddered. In the immaterium, the chaosts howled. Khorne's roar split mountain, furious that bloodshed had turned to rebellion. Tezingchi's endless laughter faltered, threads of fate unraveling as mortals defied their supposed inevitability. Nurgle groaned in dismay as humans rejected the comfort of despair. And Slaanesh shrieked, beauty curdling into fury as desire lost it. Their chorus of rage rippled through existence, but beneath it, the voices of mortals rose louder. Across the globe, resistance spread. Soldiers held lines where moments ago they had faltered. Survivors rallied, pulling one another from rubble, forming shields of flesh and faith. Families clung tighter, not in fear, but in defiance. Humanity did not break. It burned brighter. Superman stood tall, though every nerve in his body screamed to collapse. His chest rose and fell, sweat and blood streaking his face. Yet, through exhaustion, a faint smile tugged at his lips. He looked to the skies still boiling with warplight, his voice low but steady. "You hear them? Every voice, every heartbeat, you'll never silence them. As long as one life resists, you will never rule this universe." The words rippled outward, carried by broadcasts, carried by whispers, carried by sheer defiance. Across worlds touched by the warp, sparks flared. Not victories yet, but refusals. 1,000 small flames, impossible for even gods to extinguish at once. The gods retreated from their unified assault, their laughter replaced by seething rage. The storm dimmed, leaving the earth scarred and broken, but not conquered. Superman dropped to one knee, his body begging for rest, yet his spirit steady. Around him, survivors rushed forward, not to beg, not to cling in fear, but to stand with it. Soldiers saluted, children waved scraps of cloth like banners, families lifted their voices. The Pantheon united had struck with all their fury, and Superman still stood. More importantly, humanity stood with him. The war was not over. In truth, it was only the beginning. But for the first time, the Chaos Gods had felt it, resistance not from one man, but from a people who refused to kneel. Superman rose again, battered but smiling faintly, eyes fixed on the bleeding sky. The gods would come back, stronger than ever. But so would hope. The scars of Earth were still fresh, its cities still smoldering, when the sky itself split again, this time not just above one world, but across the stars. Warp rifts blossomed across the galaxy like malignant flowers, their tendrils lashing out into star systems both near and far. Suns bled crimson, nebulae curdled into storms of flesh and brass, and whole fleets were swallowed in an instant. Superman was already moving. His body blazed through the void faster than light, capes streaming like fire against the black of space. Every second mattered. Every delay meant another world was lost. He pushed harder than he ever had before, knowing Earth was no longer the only battlefield. The first world he reached was a crystalline planet orbiting twin stars, its surface covered in vast cities of glass spires. Already, the warp had erupted. Blood letters spilled through rifts in endless ranks, their blades carving through alien defenders. Above, demonic engines clawed apart orbital stations, sending debris raining into the atmosphere. Superman hit like a meteor. He smashed through one brass construct, ripping its furnace heart free and hurling it into the void. His heat vision cut through legions of demons swarming the streets below, giving civilians time to flee. He tore open collapsed spires, pulling survivors into the sky, shielding them with his own body as fire rained down. The people stared at him, an alien in red and blue, unknown to their myths, yet their terror shifted to awe. For a moment, they believed. But even as he saved thousands, tens of thousands more fell. The rifts did not close. The tide did not end. He left the world trembling, survivors clinging to hope, and launched again into the stars. Another system called for help, then another. A water world, its oceans boiling as Nurgle's plagues spread through the currents, birthing demons with bloated bodies and gaping maws. Superman dove beneath the waves, tearing leviathans apart with fists and heat, hauling entire cities sealed in domes to safety before the seas curdled into rot. His lungs burned from the disease, his body blistered with sores that healed only to reopen, but still he fought. He had no time to rest. A desert world, its surface consumed in firestorms as Khorne's demonic machines crushed entire armies beneath their treads. Superman hurled himself into their ranks, toppling titans that blotted out the sun, ripping their engines apart with his bare hand. His muscles screamed, his body dripping with his own blood mingled with alien ichor, but he fought until the screams quieted. Yet, as he looked to the horizon, more rifts opened, more legions poured forth. The galaxy burned. Everywhere he went, Superman fought with the fury of a god and the compassion of a man. He shattered demonic fleets in orbit, hurling their burning wrecks into black holes. He dragged planets from collapse, straining until his body nearly tore apart. He shielded billions. And still, it was not enough, because for every world he saved, another fell. Across the galaxy, whole civilizations crumbled, empires lost in hours, stars swallowed by warp storms, cultures erased in screams. Superman saw the agony, heard the cries, and felt the truth clawing at him. Even he, with all his strength, could not be everywhere. The weight pressed down, heavier than Khorne's hand, sharper than Slonish's whispers, fouler than Nurgle's plagues, deeper than Tiziench's scheme. For the first time, he grasped the true scale. Earth had been a battle. The galaxy was a war. Yet still he fought, because for those he saved, those few hope remained. As he tore through another rift, hurling himself toward the next doomed world, his jaw clenched, his eyes blazing. The warp sought to consume infinity, but as long as even one life could be saved, he would not stop. And far beyond the stars, in the immaterium, the chaos gods laughed. The galaxy burned. The battlefield was ash. Superman stood amid the ruins of a shattered alien city. Crystalline towers toppled into dust, the sky still burning from warp fire. Survivors gathered in ragged clusters, their faces hollow, their voices hushed. They were not human. Some bore skin like polished stone, others scales that shimmered faintly in the dim light, but their fear was universal. Superman looked into their eyes and saw the same despair he had seen on Earth. They believed this was the end, that the gods had come not just to destroy but to erase. And for a moment he felt the weight of their silence press. Then he spoke. His voice was raw but steady. "I've seen worlds burn. I've seen people fall. And I've seen them rise again. The gods want us to believe resistance is hopeless. But look at me. I stand. You can too. Together, we will fight. Together, we will endure." A murmur rippled through the crowd. A warrior, scarred and broken, lifted. "But we are nothing against them. Our fleets are shattered. Our armies." Superman stepped forward, his cape torn but still catching the wind. "You are not nothing alive. That is the one thing they can never take unless you give it freely. If you choose to fight, if you stand together, you can defy them." Something changed in their eyes. One by one, survivors stood taller. A mother lifted her child. A soldier raised his weapon again. A priest of their people, her hands trembling, spoke a word of defiance in her own tongue. The spark had caught, and then it spread. News traveled across the stars. Superman became a symbol not only for Earth, but for every world touched by chaos. On distant planets, fleets once bitter enemies turned their ships to face the civilizations that had warred for centuries now stood side by side, realizing that only unity could withstand annihilation. Superman did not command them as a general. He refused to be a ruler. Instead, he stood among them, shoulder to shoulder, a reminder that strength was not domination but shared defiance. His presence was enough. His refusal to kneel had become a banner that countless others now carried. Soon, a coalition began to form. Fleets of starships from dozens of worlds gathered, their hulls scarred but ready. Warriors of every race armed themselves, not for conquest but survival. Mystics and seers joined, wielding strange powers to shield minds from warp corruption. The galaxy's differences, once cause for endless division, became a chorus of unity. Superman moved among them, helping rebuild, lifting ships from wreckage, sparking courage with every word, every act of strength tempered by compassion. He showed them that victory was not in never falling, but in rising again every time the gods tried to crush them. At last, the fleet was ready. Vast armadas stretched across the void, a fragile but determined alliance forged from the ashes of chaos. Superman hovered before them, his body battered but his spirit steady. His voice echoed through calms and hearts alike. We are many worlds, many voices, but today we fight as one. The gods believe they own the stars. They are wrong. They belong to life. And as long as even one life resists, they will never win. The fleets roared in answer, engines igniting, banners raised. Across the void, light flared as ships took formation, warriors prepared to hurl themselves against the storm. Superman smiled faintly, pride and hope burning through exhaustion. He was no longer alone. Humanity had stood with him. Now the stars did too. The galaxy had an army, and chaos would feel it. The Alliance struck back. Fleets surged through the stars, armies rallied, and demons were driven screaming in worlds that had once despaired now burned with defiance. But even victory carried a cost, and at the heart of it stood Superman, bearing more than any being should. He had fought without pause for days, racing between systems at speeds that bent time itself. One moment he tore through a demonic war engine blotting out a planet's sun, the next he plunged into the heart of a plague-ridden ocean to shield cities beneath the wave. His fists split demons like thunderbolt, his heat vision carved through Titan, but his breaths grew slower. His skin blistered with burns that did not heal as fast. Every scream he could not answer cut deeper than any blade. He saved millions, but billions still fell, their voices lost to the warp. Could always, he carried the chaos gods knew it. They laughed through the storm, reveling in his struggle. Korn bellowed his rage with every swing of Superman's fist, feeding on the violence. Nurgle poured plagues faster than even Kryptonian lungs could endure. Slaanesh whispered that he had earned the right to stop, to rest, to choose his own happiness. And Tessinch wove threads of fate that always left him just one step too late to save everyone. He pushed harder. Every planet, every system he refused to abandon. He crossed galaxies in heartbeat, straining past exhaustion, past reason. His cape tore into rags, his voice grew hoarse, and his hands shook as he fought. For the first time, Superman's body began to betray him. On one world, a green jewel of forests and silver seas, he saved them. He stood alone against a host of demons, fighting until the skies burned, until his blood mixed with theirs, until silence finally fell. Survivors crept from shelters, staring at the figure swaying in the smoke. At one, he had saved them. And then his knees buckled. His body crumpled to the ground, strength spent, lungs gasping for air he could barely draw. The people rushed to him, not in fear, not in despair, but with hands outstretched. They caught him, lifted him, not as a god but as a man who had given everything. One voice, trembling but strong, spoke, "Rest, protector. We will fight now. You have given us more than strength. You have given us the will." Superman, barely conscious, opened his eyes. He saw them, not broken, not conquered, but standing. Families holding weapons, survivors building barricades, soldiers swearing oaths. They were ready to resist without him. For the first time, he allowed himself to accept the truth. He could not save everyone. He was not meant to. His strength had carried them this far, but his greatest power had never been his fist. It was the spark he ignited in others. His lips curled in a faint, weary smile as his eyes closed, exhaustion dragging him into darkness. But the galaxy did not fall with him, because hope no longer rested on his shoulders alone. It had spread, carried by countless hands, countless voices, countless words. The gods raged, but even their fury could not silence the truth. Superman had taught the stars to stand. The battlefields were gone. The warp storms had vanished. For the first time in what felt like eternity, there was silence. Superman opened his eyes and saw Krypton. Not the Krypton of his memories, broken and burning, but whole. Its crystalline towers gleamed beneath a golden sun. Vast cities pulsed with life, families strolled through gardens of silver-leafed trees, and laughter echoed across streets untouched by sorrow. The air was warm and clean, rich with the scent of flowers he thought he'd never smell again. And then, voices. His parents stood before him. Jor-El, tall and wise, with pride shining in his eyes. Lara, radiant, her hand gently resting his cheek. Beside him, Lois smiled, her smile untouched by age, her arms warm as she held him close. "Clark," she whispered, "it's over. You don't have to fight any." His heart ached, his chest tightened. He wanted to believe. Everywhere he looked, there were faces he recognized. Every person he had ever saved, alive, smiling, untouched by grief. The boy from Metropolis, the miners on the distant colony world, even strangers who had perished in disasters he could never prevent. They were here, happy, eternally safe. It was everything he had ever dreamed, every wound of his soul mended in a single moment. But as the days passed, if time even moved here, he began to notice. The smiles never changed. The laughter never faltered. No one grew older, no one stumbled, no one cried. Every gesture seemed rehearsed, perfect in its timing, perfect in its repetition. Lois never frowned, never aged, never questioned. Jarrell's hand on his shoulder never faltered, as though frozen in pride. And inside, Superman began to feel it. The hollowness. This was no life. It was a painting, a song trapped on reap. No risk, no failure, no freedom. Then came the voices, whispers from the air, soft as silk and sharp as blades. The Chaos Gods spoke as one, their tones weaving through the illusion. This can be yours, Kal-El, eternal Krypton, eternal love, eternal victory. No more suffering, no more. You need only accept. You need only stay. He closed his eyes. The temptation clawed at him, deeper than any battle wound. His every longing, his every regret, every night he had spent wishing for one more day with his parents, one more smile from Lois, one more chance to save the ones he had lost. It was here. It was his. He could have it. And yet, he knew. Slowly, painfully, he shook his voice trembled, but his words were clear. No, this isn't life. Life isn't perfect. Life hurts. It ends. And that's why it mattered. Without choice, without risk, this isn't a world, it's a prison. A lie dressed as paradise. The smiles froze. The streets cracked. Krypton's towers trembled as fractures of warp fire spread through their foundations. Lois's perfect face flickered, eyes melting into endless pits of desire. His parents' voices warped into whispers of rage. The gods pressed harder. Why refuse what you long for? Why bleed for a universe that will never thank you? Stay, Superman. Stay, and no peace. His fists clenched. His jaw set. He felt his heart breaking all over again as the illusion dissolved, as Lois's touch faded into smoke, as his parents' warmth burned into ash. Because peace without freedom is hollow, he said, voice firm. Because love without choice isn't love. I'd rather fight 1,000 wars in the real world than rule in your paradise of chains. The illusion shattered. Krypton's sky split into screaming warp fire, its towers collapsing into a sea of shadows. Superman stood alone in the wreckage, his cape torn but his spirit unyielding. The gods hissed in fury, their whispers rising, but Superman had refused. Fire swallowed the horizon. Metropolis, Gotham, Coast City, names that once meant hope, burned like funeral pyres beneath a sky torn by claws of warplant. Superman hung in the air, choking on ash that tasted like memory. Sirens wailed, then choked out. Streets split open, swallowing crowds that reached for him with soot-blackened hands. He dove, faster than thought, but the ground closed a heartbeat before he arrived. Screams cut off. Silence felt like judgment. The scene lurched. The watchtower drifted dead above Earth, windows pulverized, oxygen bleeding into glittering frost. Wonder Woman floated in the airless dark, eyes dim. Batman's cape coiled around his broken frame like a flag at half-mast. Flash lay still, the universe finally slower than loss. Lantern's ring flickered and died. A green star swallowed by red. Too late, the void whispered in 1,000 voices. You are always, always too late. He reached for them, and the bodies dissolved into ash that took Lois's shape. She smiled through the dust, tender and terrible. Veins of violet light crawled beneath her skin, blooming into sigils that writhed. It's all right, she whispered, as her pupils stretched into black spirals. You tried. Her breath became flies. Her fingers unraveled into ribbons of flesh. He clutched at nothing as she scattered on a wind he could not stop. Worlds unspooled. A colony burned while he battled elsewhere. A hospital drowned under tidal waves while he saved a city from plague. Children coughed in his arms, promising they weren't afraid, then went still while he begged the sun for one more second. Whole civilizations filled the skies with curses. You chose them, not us. Your hope is a noose. Your arrival is our doom. Monuments to him toppled into pits of skulls. Banners of his symbol smoldered, edges curling like leaves in autumn. The chorus swelled, the pantheon speaking through every ruin. Tzeentch coiled around his thoughts. Your choices stitch failure to fate. See how every path leads to grief. Nurgle dripped comfort that smelled like graves. Lay it down, child. The struggle is rot. Accept the softness of ending. Slaanesh purred. Embrace what you, release what you owe. Khorne thundered. Spare or slay, the blood is mine. His knees struck broken glass. Shards bit deep red beadlets welled and steamed on Kryptonian skin. He bowed his head, palms braced on ruined concrete, shoulders shaking under a weight older than stars. Guilt flooded him, thick, relentless, absolute. The simplest surrender tempted him. Close his eyes and let the tide erase the age. End the failing, end the trying, end the failing. A small sound threaded the thunder, a laugh, bright as a bell, not divine. Humans. A boy's laugh in a burning building long ago, when a stranger in blue smashed through smoke and said, "I've got you." A farm's wind through corn. Ma's hands warm with soap and soil. Pa's quiet pride. Lois's rye, Smallville, when courage needed teasing. The click of a camera at a shelter when a child waved despite the sirens. 1,000 fragile moments that never made the news and mattered anyway. He opened his eye. Ash blurred the world, but the line of his hands against the ground was steady. He drew a breath that burned and spoke into the ruin, voice cracked but clear. "These are my fears, not the truth." The illusions pressed closer, he spoke louder. "I am not defined by what I couldn't do yesterday. I am defined by what I choose now." The city buckled, trying to throw him back to his knee. He stood. "Hope isn't a promise to win," he said, rising into the cinder-thick air. "Hope is a promise to try again and again, because life deserves the attempt." The watchtower ran it, then tore the mirage, fought to hold. He flew straight through it, heat vision cutting a tunnel of clean light. Statues of his failures cracked along hairline truths. Lois's ash face reformed, he reached back and let her pass like mist. "I love you, and because I do, I won't live in lies." The Pantheon's jeers collapsed into static. Khorne's roar dimmed to a growl. Nurgle's lullaby curdled. Slaanesh hit. Tzeentch's laughter clicked into irritated silence. Flame peeled away from skyscrapers. Stars shone through rents in the hallucination. He hovered alone above a city still wounded, still real. He looked down, at damage, at survivors, at work left to do, and felt the ache settle into something simpler than triumph, resolve. He curled his fists, not to strike, but to hold. "We go on, to the living. We choose. That is enough to begin." The warp writhed. The gods had tested, tempted, and tormented, and still the Kryptonian refused to fall. But now they struck together, weaving their will into a prison of thought and dream, a net no mortal or godling had ever escaped. Superman stood in darkness. From it, Lois emerged, her face wet with tears. She clutched his hands, her voice breaking. "Clark, please, it's over. You've done enough. Stop fighting. Stay with me. Don't leave me again." Behind her, the dead rose, parents, friends, countless lives he had failed to save. They gazed at him with hollow eyes, their voices joined in accusation. "Why let us die if you could have stopped it? You saved some, but not all. You are never enough." Then light surged. Armies filled the void, worlds upon worlds, alien and human, kneeling before him. Their chant thundered, "Ruler, leader, be our God. Only you can bring peace." Crowns of fire lowered toward his brow. In the heavens, whole galaxies turned their suns toward him in worship, promising love without end, power without question. Chains of light and shadow wound around his body, formed from desire, fear, and guilt. They pressed on his chest, bowed his shoulders, dragged him to his knees. The warp howled its triumph. Khorne's laughter split like iron, Tzeentch hissed in delight, Nurgle crooned his approval, and Slaanesh purred with hunger. For a moment, the universe seemed to break. Superman's head lowered, his breath ragged, the weight of chains crushing every part of him. Then his fists clenched, the chains cracked. He raised his head, eyes blazing like twin suns. His voice shook the void. "I don't fight because I want power. I don't endure because I fear failure. I don't save because I need worship. I do it because every life matters, because hope is worth the pain." The chains shattered like glass. Illusions of Lois dissolved into smoke. The accusing voices turned to silence. The armies of worshippers burst apart into motes of false light. Galaxies winked out, their crowns collapsing into dust. Superman rose, his shoulders unbound, his body blazing with the light of defiance. He spread his arms, not in conquest but in declaration. "I am not your god. I am not your weapon. I am a man who chooses, and as long as I stand, you will never own me." The warp shuddered. For the first time, the Chaos gods knew something alien to fear. Not fear of his strength, but of what they could not corrupt. His incorruptible will struck them harder than any blow, his refusal echoing through their dominion like a crack of thunder in eternity. Superman's body glowed, his cape billowing as though caught in solar winds. He stood like a star blazing against the abyss, his very presence tearing holes in the illusions that bound him. The gods roared, their fury shaking the immaterium, but it was too late. He had broken their chains, and now he was coming for them. The darkness peeled away, leaving only firelight, battlefield, and the promise of the final war. Superman hovered in the void, battered but unbroken, eyes locked on the storm where the Pantheon awaited. His spirit burned brighter than suns, brighter than the warp itself. The time for temptation was over. The time for the final battle had come. The galaxy screamed. Rifts tore open across the stars, spilling rivers of unreality that consumed whole systems in minutes. Suns flickered and died, swallowed by warp storms that spread like cracks in glass. Moons bled, planets broke, and fleets that had once held firm against demonic legions now shattered like toys hurled against eternity. Everywhere, demons poured forth by the trillions. Brass-armored hosts of Khorne howled for blood, tearing through armadas with axes the size of mountains. Tzeentchi's avian horrors warped into endless shapes, rewriting physics with each flap of their wings. Nurgle's bloated monstrosities oozed contagion into entire atmosphere, suffocating planets beneath their rot. And from the shadows, Slaanesh's demons whispered into their minds, turning brother against brother, mother against child, until whole civilizations collapsed without a single blade. And above it all, the gods themselves manifest. Colossal avatars loomed across the void, stretching across star system like living constellation. Khorne, a mountain of brass and bone, his axe dragging through suns and splitting them like embers. Tzeentchi, a serpent of fractal fire, every scale an unfolding nightmare of possibility. Nurgle, a swollen giant of rot, cradling galaxies in decaying hands. And Slaanesh, a figure of radiant perfection, so beautiful it shattered reason, so terrible it hollowed out the will to resist. Their combined presence bent reality itself. Space warp, time twisted, cause and effect broke apart. Ships flickered between centuries. Armies fought battles that had already happened and would never happen and were happening all at once. The universe itself teetered on the brink of unraveling. In the midst of the storm, Superman stood, battered, scarred. His cape is a ragged shadow of what it once was, but his eyes burned brighter than the sun. He hovered before the Alliance fleet, 1,000 civilizations united for the first time in history, their ships blotting out stars by sheer number. Across calms, across hearts, across the chaos itself, his voice carried, "This is the moment. Not for one world, not for one people, for all life. They want us to believe it's over, that we cannot stand. But look around you, we are still. And as long as we breathe, as long as we fight, they will never win." Silence held for a heartbeat. Then voices rose. Captains shouted orders. Soldiers roared in defiance. Civilians in ships built for flight, not war, clenched their fists and prayed not in despair, but in resolve. 1,000 worlds, 1,000 species, stood together under one banner, not of conquest, not of dominion, but of survival and hope. The Chaos Gods laughed, their voices thundering across the void. Khorne bellowed, "One warrior against the tide." Tzeentch hissed, "Every move, foreseen, every choice, mine." Nurgle groaned, "Decay takes all." Slaanesh purred, "Even you long to fall, Kal-El." Superman raised his fist, eyes blazing red, his voice cutting through them like a blade of truth. "I am not one. I am every voice that refuses to kneel, and I will never fall." The Alliance surged forward, fleets colliding with demonic legions, weapons blazing, shields shattering. Stars erupted as ships sacrificed themselves to close rifts. Armies of warriors and mystics hurled themselves into the storm, their courage fueled by the figure in red and blue blazing at their center. And Superman hurled himself into the maelstrom. Through brass hosts, through plagues, through illusions of temptation, through blades and claws and fire, he tore. Every punch cracked the warp's veil, every breath carried the strength of 1 billion souls who refused to surrender. His body bled, his heart ached, but he flew faster, higher, harder, until he struck into the storm where the gods themselves loomed. The battlefield was set. The universe itself trembled. The gods had never faced defiance, and for the first time, they knew the possibility of loss. The void itself groaned as the avatars of the Chaos Gods descended. Each was the size of worlds, their presence enough to unravel suns, their voices echoing through the marrow of creation. Superman hovered before them, a lone figure blazing red and blue against an ocean of terror. Khorne struck. The Lord of Skulls raised his axe, a weapon forged of war's eternity, and brought it down with a roar that split galaxies. The shockwave tore through fleets, ripped moons into rubble, and sent stars flaring into supernovas. Superman surged forward, hands outstretched, meeting the impossible force head-on. The impact cracked his bones, tore his skin, sent blood boiling from his ears, but he held on. His fists crashed against Khorne's brass chest, blow after blow ringing like war drums. Khorne bellowed with laughter, each strike feeding his hunger, but Superman refused to kill, his every restraint a defiance sharper than any blade. Then Tzeentchi kept, reality folding like paper. Time looped, moments repeating endlessly. Superman saw himself fall 1,000 ways, burned, broken, corrupted, before he even acted. His enemies and allies blurred into impossible form, futures splintering with every choice. The serpent of fate hissed, "Every path ends in me." But Superman clenched his jaw, focusing not on the shifting lies but on a single truth, his choice, his will, here and now. He plowed through the paradox, smashing through illusions until Tezinchi's fractal form shrieked, its endless laughter faltering beneath the weight of clarity. Nurgle followed, a mountain of decay whose breath turned nebulae into rot. Clouds of pestilence engulfed Superman, clinging to his lungs, searing his skin, corrupting even his Kryptonian cells. His vision blurred, his strength waned, despair coiled tight around his chest. The god crooned, "Why fight? All things wither. All hope dies, except, and I will cradle you in peace everlasting." Superman staggered, his knees buckling, but then he remembered the faces he fought for, fragile, fleeting, alive. He coughed blood, stood taller, and bellowed in the fog, "Hope lives it chooses." The words blazed like a beacon, and the pestilence faltered before the heat of his defiance. And then came Slaanesh. She stepped forward, radiant and terrible, her voice caressing every wound, every doubt. Lois's face flickered in her smile, her arms opened wide. "Kal-El, lay it down. Haven't you given enough? Come to me, and know only joy." His heart clenched, his longing screamed, every ache in his body begged for release. For a heartbeat, he nearly reached. Then he drew his hand back. "Desire doesn't define me." Sacrifice. Her beauty shattered to fury, her form shrieking as she recoiled. One by one, the gods had struck with their essence, rage, deception, despair, temptation. And one by one, Superman endured. He could not match their infinity. His body was broken, his mind scarred, his heart heavy. Yet he still stood. Hovering in the void, his chest heaving, blood dripping from split lips, Superman glared into the abyss of divinity. His voice was ragged, but carried like thunder. "You can break my body, you can twist my mind, but you will never have my soul." The Pantheon roared in frustration, their avatars reeling, not from his fists, but from what they could not corrupt. Superman floated unbowed, a lone spark defying the storm. The universe held its breath. The final clash was yet to come. The gods moved as one. Khorne's axe carved a horizon from star to star. Tzeentch folded futures into a noose. Nurgle exhaled and galaxies soured. Slaanesh sang a note that promised bliss and ended will. Their powers braided into one annihilating stroke, a storm meant to erase the stubborn spark that would not go out. Superman floated at its center, a silhouette of torn cape and bleeding light. His bones were hairline fractures, his breath a rasp. The Alliance fleets flickered at the edges of ruined prayers tangled with battle. He could feel the universe leaning toward silence. He closed his eyes and turned his face to every sun he had ever known. He drank the last hard gold from distant stars, the faint warmth of dwarfs, the blaze of giants. Solar fire threaded his veins, but it was not enough. Then he listened. Across worlds, through ruins and cockpits and rooftops, voices rose. A miner on a shattered moon whispered, "Please." A captain barked, "Hold the line." A child lifted a scrap of red cloth and said, "He'll get up." Priests and pilots, farmers and fighters, each sent a filament of belief, slender and unbreakable. Hope crossed the void faster than light. He opened his eye. They burned like twin dawns. "Come on," and the Pantheon's strike fell. Time fractured into knives, Kor's wavered space tried to forget itself. He flew anyway. He should have been torn to mist, to ideas, to nothing. Instead, he gathered every filament, every prayer, every refusal to kneel, and wound them around his failing body like a shield. The first wave hit. He buckled. The second wave hit. Blood flash froze and boiled in the same heartbeat. The third wave hit. He screamed, and the scream was a promise. Not today. He broke through. Superman reached the heart of the storm, where the gods' powers knotted into a burning core. He pressed his palms together as if in prayer, drew in one last breath, and spoke not to the gods, but to the living. "Lend me your tomorrow." The universe answered. Light surged. Not just solar light, but the light of vows kept and hands held, first steps and last stands of laughter in blackout nights of a mother who tried again, of a soldier who lowered a weapon, of a stranger who shared the small lights that make a cosmos worth saving rose and fused into a single star. He struck. The blow was not a punch, it was a sunrise. It tore through Khorne's avatar, blasting brass into meteors. It sliced Tzeentch's fractal coils, possibly collapsing into one chosen path. It washed Nurgle's rot clean as rain. It shattered Slaanesh's song into silence. leaving desire unchained from domination. The storm recoiled, the warp-howled rifts shrieked shut like wounds deciding to heal. Silence fell. Superman drifted, dim as an ember. His suit hung in ribbons, his skin was a map of scars. Gravity remembered him and he fell, tumbling past wreckage until a carrier's bay opened like a waiting hand. Arms caught him, doctors, soldiers, children, sobbing, laughing, touching the proof that the impossible had held. He tried to speak. Nothing came. Then a whisper, dry as ash and warm as sunrise. As long as there's hope, there's a tomorrow. Across the fleets, cheers broke into weep. Across planets, sirens became songs. Across the quieted warp, the gods retreated, not destroyed but denied, their hunger thrown back upon itself. Hours or eons later he stood again. Not tall, not whole, but upright. He looked out at fractured stars, at ships limping home, at signals of life rekindling like campfires after a storm. The war was eternal. So was the answer. He lifted off, a battered star against the night, and went where someone still needed saving.